Welcome to Twin Talk. This is Joy, and I'm here with my sister Angie. Today we're diving into one of the most famous and controversial American novels ever written, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. The book was published in the U.S. in 1885. The Audible version is 10 hours and 10 minutes and is narrated by Elijah Wood. So, Angie, what did you think about Elijah Wood's performance?
He was amazing. He was probably one of the best audio narrations I've ever heard. I honestly felt like he was Huckleberry Finn personified. So he's definitely worth a listen just to hear his rendition of Huck Finn. I could listen to his voice all day. It was perfection.
I agree. He did an amazing job. It was worth listening to the Audible version just to hear him narrate it. So
Definitely adds to the whole experience of the book.
for sure. This novel follows Huck Finn as he escapes his troubled home life and travels down the Mississippi River with Jim, an enslaved man seeking freedom. We'll cover the basic plot, compare it to the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and end by sharing our favorite passages. So let's jump in. And this is kind of funny. The author starts out by stating, notice, persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot by order of the author. And that sounds so much like Mark Twain. If you're familiar with Mark Twain's teaching, that is quintessential Mark Twain right there. And what are we doing? We are trying to find a moral. We're trying to talk about the plot. And we're doing everything he warned us against. But we can't say we have not been warned.
Amen. All right. So in the beginning, we see that Huck is living with the widow Douglas and Miss Watson, who are trying to civilize him. His abusive father, Pap, returns and kidnaps him, and Huck fakes his own death to escape Pap. He runs away to Jackson's Island and discovers Jim, who has run away after hearing he might be sold. And this is where the real journey begins.
And I'm just going to insert something real quick here. Once again, when you read these books as a kid and when you read them as an adult, they take on whole new meanings. And man, I didn't realize how sinister his dad was. I thought, ooh, he has a mean dad. But when you're an adult and read about the abuse, it's really scary. Okay, so the middle part is basically Huck and Jim travel down the Mississippi River on a raft, and they encounter the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons, which is a violent family feud. And Angie, I was trying to figure out, they sound so much like the Hatfields and McCoys, which we have talked about in the past. Do you think the Grangerfords and Shepherdsons were based on the Hatfields and McCoys?
I do think it's possible. I kind of did a little research on that just to see if that was what they were based on. And according to my research, there were so many feuds going on at that time. They said it could have been based on basically any feud. They said it would not have been unheard of for him to know people personally that had feuds.
Okay. After they leave the Shepherdsons and the Grangerfords, they come across these two characters. They're two con men, really, and they're pretending to be royalty. They call themselves the Duke and the King. And Huck is struggling with his conscience during this time on whether or not he should turn Jim in, since Jim, is technically a slave. And this is where we see the famous moral turning point. And this is what a lot of people like to discuss, although we probably won't. But this Huck decides to help Jim, even if it means he'll go to hell. Of course, this is faulty thinking by today's standards. Back then, he wouldn't have been considered faulty thinking by him, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So in the end, Jim is captured and held at Aunt Sally's farm. And Tom Sawyer arrives and creates an unnecessarily complicated rescue plan. That's typical Tom Sawyer. After the escape, it's revealed that Jim had already been freed in Miss Watson's will.
Right. So let's talk about Huckleberry Finn versus The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Which one was more enjoyable for you to read?
For me, it was probably Tom Sawyer. I love the whole concept of them floating down the Mississippi River on a raft. I mean, that's awesome, obviously, but at some point, I'll tell you where it lost me, Joy, was when the Duke and the King, the two con men, I just felt like that part of the book just drug on forever.
Me too. Same here. I enjoyed Tom Sawyer a lot more, and I was thinking about why. I think it's because we had more characters. We had Aunt Sally, Tom Sawyer, Becky Thatcher, and I just loved all the adventures, like them being on Jackson's Island, and I loved the story about the cave, and just all the trouble that the kids got into, and it was more of a carefree. I mean, there were some dark passages, about them getting lost in the cave and thinking they're going to die and seeing the murder. But overall, I just think Tom Sawyer's a lot more enjoyable. Although I do love the idea of being free on a raft and just kind of living on your own terms.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there was, don't get me wrong, there was some absolutely incredible and beautiful writing in Huck Finn. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to share some of our favorite passages. So I'm not saying that there's not good writing, and I'm not saying it's not a good storyline. It just felt longer and more tedious than Tom Sawyer.
Yes, if he could have cut the Duke and the King, I felt like that just went on and on. If even shortened that by half, I think it'd have been a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah.
But there's some beautiful writing in it, and it's been called one of the great American novels.
Yeah, people will tell you, like people that discuss books, they'll tell you that Huck Finn is the better book of the two.
Right.
Like it's more considered more of a classic than, well, maybe not more of a classic, but it's considered
seen as more of a children's book.
Yes.
And Huck Finn is seen more of a statement about our society.
Yes, it has more
maybe more depth
to it for sure. So I guess let's go ahead and go on to our favorite passages.
Right.
He writes about this feud between these two families in almost a comical way. It was one of my favorite passages. Okay, so there was another clan of aristocracy around there, 5 or 6 families, mostly of the name of Shepherdson. They was a high-toned and well-born and rich grand as the tribe of Grangerfords. The Shepherdsons and Grangerfords used the same steamboat landing, which was about 2 miles above our house. One day, Buck and me was away out in the woods hunting and heard a horse coming. We was crossing the road, and Buck says, "Quick, jump for the woods." We done it, and then peeped down the woods through the leaves. Pretty soon a splendid young man come galloping down the road, setting his horse easy and looking like a soldier. He had his gun across his pommel. I had seen him before. It was young Harney Shepherdson. I heard Buck's gun go off at my ear, and Harney's hat tumbled off from his head. He grabbed his gun and rode straight to the place where he was hid, but we didn't wait. We started through the woods on a run. The woods weren't thick, so I looked over my shoulder to dodge the bullet, and twice I seen Harney cover Buck with his gun, and then he rode away the way he come to get his hat, I reckon, but I couldn't see. We never stopped running till we got home. The old gentleman's eyes blazed a minute. 'Twas pleasure mainly, I judged. Then his face sort of smoothed down, and he says kind of gentle, "I don't like that shooting from behind a bush. Why didn't you step into the road, my boy?" The Shepherdsons don't, Father. They always take advantage. Soon as I could get Buck down by the corn cribs under the trees by ourselves, I says, "Did you want to kill him, Buck?" "Well, I bet I did." "But what did he do to you?" "Him? He never done nothing to me." "Well, then what did you want to kill him for?" "Why, nothing, only it's on account of the feud." "Well, what's a feud?" "Why, where were you raised? Don't you know what a feud is?" "Never heard of it before. Tell me about it." "Well," says Buck, "a feud is this way. A man has a quarrel with another man and kills him. Then that other man's brother kills him. Then the other brothers on both sides goes for one another. Then the cousins chip in. And by everybody's killed off and there ain't no more feud. But it's kind of slow and takes a long time." "Has this one been going on long, Buck?" "Well, I should reckon it started 30 years ago or summers along there. There was trouble about something and then a lawsuit to settle it, and the suit went again, and one of the men, and so he up and shot the man that won the suit, which he would naturally do, of course, anybody would." "Well, what was the trouble about, Buckland?" "I reckon, I don't know." "Well, who done the shooting? Was it a Grangerford or a Shepherdson?" "Laws, how do I know? It was so long ago." "Don't anybody know?" "Oh, yes, Pa knows, I reckon, and some of the other people, but they don't know now what the row was about in the first place." "Has there been many killed, Buck?" "Yes, right smart chance of funerals, but they don't always kill. Pa's got a few buckshot in 'em, but he don't mind it 'cause he don't weigh much anyway. Bob's been carved up some with a bowie, and Tom's been hurt once or twice. Has anybody been killed this year, Buck?" "Yes, we got one, and they got one."
Yeah, he definitely has a way of taking something serious, and that was true. That sounds so much like the Hatfields and McCoys, and it kind of makes light and just kind of shows how he has his satire. He has a show showing us how silly it all really is.
It's like he can take a real life situation and write it and just show it. Just it's black and white to him how ridiculous it is, and he has a way of showing us. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Do you want to go ahead and read your passage next?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just thought this is one of the most beautiful parts of the book. I absolutely love this passage. So Huck says, sometimes we'd have that whole river all to ourselves for the longest time. Yonder was the banks and the islands, across the water, and maybe a spark, which was a candle in a cabin window. And sometimes on the water you could see a spark or two, on a raft or a scow, you know, and maybe you could hear a fiddle or a song coming over from one of them crafts. It's lovely to live on a raft. We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars, and we used to lay on our backs and look up at them and discuss about whether they was made or only just happened. Jim, he allowed they was made, but I allowed they happened. I judged it would have took too long to make so many. Jim said the moon could have laid them. Well, that looked kind of reasonable, so I didn't say nothing against it, because I've seen a frog lay most as many, so of course it could be done. We used to watch the stars that fell, too, and see them streak down. Jim allowed they got spoiled and was hove out of the nest. Once or twice of a night we would see a steamboat slipping along in the dark, and now and then she would belch a whole world of sparks up out of her chimblies, and they would rain down in the river and look awful pretty. Then she would turn a corner and her lights would wink out and her powwow shut off and leave the river still again. And by her waves would get to us a long time after she was gone and joggle the raft a bit, and after that you wouldn't hear nothing, for you couldn't tell how long, except maybe frogs or something. After midnight the people on shore went to bed, and then for 2 or 3 hours the shores was black. No more sparks in the cabin windows. These sparks was our clock. The first one that showed again meant morning was coming, so we hunted a place to hide and tie up right away.
Love that passage.
I do too. It's beautiful.
It is. I mean, can't you just see them floating down and seeing the candles in people's windows? And I thought there was one part in the book where he says sometimes it was almost like they could hear disembodied voices as they floated by. It would be someone on a raft or a boat near them, and they could hear them, but they couldn't see them through the fog.
It is funny how sound does travel differently over water. And one thing that I love about this book is you do notice that when they're on the river, it's peaceful. Pretty much, it's peaceful. They have freedom. They can live how they want. It's when they get on land. That's when you have the corruption of society. That's when you have all the feuds and the battles and the people chasing Jim because, you know, he's a runaway slave. And so the river symbolizes, you know, freedom, peace, escape, possibility. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful, I guess, picture that he paints anytime that they're on the river.
Okay, I want to read this passage about a funeral, and it's kind of interesting that in Tom Sawyer, there's a funeral, and they fake their own death, and he talks about the behavior of people at the funeral, and I don't know if I mentioned this in that podcast, I think I did, how there's no difference today between funerals today and then, and the way people act.
Human nature has not changed.
No, it has not changed the way, and so this passage here, it talks about the people that work the funeral, the undertaker, and I thought this is so funny because I can even see this today. But this is actually he takes a funeral and he makes it's actually kind of funny the way he describes it. Okay, so this is actually out of chapter 17, I believe. Towards the middle of the day, the undertaker come with his man, and they set the coffin in the middle of the room on a couple of chairs, and then set out all chairs in a row, and borrowed more from the neighbors till the hall and the parlor and the dining room was full. Then the people began to flock in, and the beats and the girls took seats in the front row at the head of the coffin, and for a half of an hour the people filed around slow in single rank and looked down at the dead man's face a minute, and some dropped in a tear, and it was all very still and solemn, only the girls and the beats holding handkerchiefs to their eyes and keeping their heads bent and sobbing a little. There weren't no other sound but the scraping of the feet on the floor and blowing noses, because people always blows them more at funerals than they do at other places except church. When the place was packed full, the undertaker, he slid around in his black gloves with his soft, soothing ways, putting on the last touches and getting people and things all ship-shape and comfortable, and making no more sound than a cat. He never spoke. He moved people around. He squeezed in late ones. He opened up passageways and done it with nods and signs with his hands. Then he took his place over against the wall. He was the softest, glidingest. They had borrowed a melodeon, a sick one, and when everything was ready, a young woman sat down and worked it, and it was pretty squeaky and colicky, and everybody joined in and sung, and Peter was the only one that had a good thing, according to my notion. Then the Reverend Hobson opened up, slow and solemn, and began to talk. And straight off, the most outrageous row busted out in the cellar a body ever heard. It was only one dog, but he made a most powerful racket, and he kept it up right all along. And the parson, he had to stand there over the coffin and wait. You couldn't hear yourself think. It was right down awkward, and nobody didn't seem to know what to do. But pretty soon they seen that long-legged undertaker make a sign to the preacher, as much as to say, "Don't worry, just depend on me." Then he stooped down and began to glide along the wall, just his shoulders showing over the people's heads. So he glided along, and the powwow and racket getting more and more outrageous all the time. And at last, when he had gone around two sides of the room, he disappears down cellar. Then in about 2 seconds, we heard a whack, and the dog, he finished up with a most amazing howl or two, and then everything was dead still. And the parson began his solemn talk where he left off. In a minute or two, here comes this undertaker's back and shoulders gliding along the wall again. And so he glided and glided around 3 sides of the room, and then rose up and shaded his mouth with his hands and stretched his neck out towards the preacher over the people's heads, and says in a kind of a coarse whisper, "He had a rat." Then he drooped down and glided along the wall again to his place. You could see it was a great satisfaction to the people, because naturally they wanted to know. A little thing like that don't cost nothing, and it's just in the little things that makes a man be looked up and liked. There weren't no more popular man in town than what that undertaker was. Stealthiest man I ever seen, and there weren't no more smile to him than there is to a ham.
Yeah, that is pretty funny how he can
Just
his
that whole
descriptions
scene.
of how things still are today, really.
Yeah, I don't know why. I really like that passage.
Okay, so I do have a question for you. Okay, how many Huck Finns do you give this book?
I'm gonna give it 3.5 Huck Finns.
Okay. I think I'm going to give it 3.5 as well. I don't remember what we gave Tom Sawyer. Hopefully I gave Tom...
I think it was higher than 3.5. I want to say it was at least a 4.
I think we gave
maybe a
Tom
4.5.
Sawyer at least a 4, maybe even a 5.
You might have given it a 5.
I'm giving it a 5 because it's one of my all-time favorite
You
books.
were pretty, taken with that book.
Oh, I love... Tom Sawyer will always be one of my favorite, for sure, childhood books. But...
Yeah.
So that's our discussion of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain.
Whether you see it as a coming-of-age adventure or a sharp critique of society, it's definitely a novel that sparks conversation.
And let us know which book you prefer. Do you prefer Huckleberry Finn or The Adventures of Tom Sawyer?
Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time on Twin Talk.